So Chelsea, would you like to join us and start this discussion? Thank you very much. We've saved a full hour for you. Yeah, that's right.
It won't take that long.
52 minutes.
I'm going to drop her presentation in the chat and then. Thank you.
Also joined by Taylor Keegan from Parks and Rec, who could pull up.
Oh, yeah, if Taylor wants to run it. Yeah,
Just one quick question logistically. Would you prefer to take questions during the presentation or at the end?
Open to it.
Okay.
It may make sense for us to get through the presentation and then cover questions,
Okay.
Because questions may get answered in the presentation, but, if folks have urgent questions.
Thank you.
and Taylor, the floor is yours for the screen.
As Taylor's working on that, I will just introduce myself. I'm Chelsea Ward-Waller. I work for the municipality. I'm the capital improvement program coordinator for Public Works. Taking that hat off really quickly, I'm also the Airport Heights Community Council president and was on the FCC for at least a year, if not multiple. So I'm very familiar with all things community council and CIP. Is how I got involved in both of those things. And I'm joined by Taylor Keegan. Taylor, go for it.
Hi, I'm Taylor Keegan. I'm attending remotely because I have a little tickle in my throat and I don't want to get anybody sick. So thanks for having this hybrid ability here. But I've been with the Parks and Recreation Department since 2015. I was a park planner and a landscape architect for many years. And this past Christmas, I started to be the superintendent and dive into the CIP process. And I just want to thank Chelsea for letting me tag along and share what Parks and Rec does and try to answer any questions with regard to the CIP process. So thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Taylor. So the next slide is just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. From the Public Works perspective, we'll talk about how we identify needs. We'll talk about the annual programs. We'll talk about our sort of CIP timeline throughout the whole year. And then I'll also mention how we evaluate projects. And then for Parks and Rec.
Yes. So for us, we'll talk about internal needs. Really, it's for us too about encouraging partnerships, not only with community councils, but our nonprofit partner like the Anchorage Park Foundation. And in the past, I know that the CIP process has been confusing. And so one of my goals at Parks and Recreation is to try to build some transparency with this process. And so hopefully that starts with our presentation today.
Awesome. And then I also just want to mention that Public Works and Parks and Rec are not the only two departments in the municipality that have capital projects. So we're going to cover what we know and touch, but just know that there's a lot more to the CIP than road projects and park projects.
And I will say DOT is probably also going to come and do a presentation about how it affects them. Great.
We know when that will be.
No, we haven't said, but in the new year, I'll keep you posted.
Okay. Oh, and that's, I guess, just on that note as well, we do plan to come back when the CIP survey is open to provide a more like hands-on CIP survey training. So today we're talking more sort of conceptually and about the whole, how it all fits together. And then when that survey is launched, we'll dive into sort of how to do the survey itself, and then also be available for sort of technical assistance throughout the life of the survey.
The first of a few trainings.
Yes. Yeah, part one. Okay, so next slide is just a pretty picture slide. The example from 30th Avenue, how do we get there? The CIP process is how we got from A to B in terms of programming, funding, and making a project happen. So that's mostly just because we like pictures of our projects. Thank you for indulging us. So for Public Works, there's a lot of ways that needs are identified. Firstly, the community council surveys. We hear from assembly members and legislators and constituents. We hear administration priorities. You just heard about the budget. They have specific priorities. We know we have adopted plans and programs. You heard about the Midtown plan, you know, there are probably gonna be projects that come out of that plan that will then feed into the projects that we then need to program. We have acts of nature or emergent situations. You may remember the Northern Lights Boulevard culvert that collapsed a couple years ago. That was a massive project that wasn't on anybody's radar. But we still had to program that and address it. And then we also, you know, street maintenance is out there. They're plowing our roads right now, but in the summer, they're out there driving around sweeping and filling potholes, and they identify a huge portion of the projects that we end up programming through Public Works, just because they are the eyes on the street. And then, so we also, one example, we do a survey every 3 years of road conditions in the municipality that grades every road in terms of its condition. So that's just another way that either helps sort of corroborate the feedback that we're getting from the community or from street maintenance, or it helps sort of flag maybe a whole subdivision is having a bad issue and therefore we need to focus on that area. It's just kind of an additional check, and it's also required. It's the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and somehow it's like related to our bonding ability. So that's great. Just a side note on that, because I'm a total transportation dork, I believe through DOT, we're hoping to figure out how to do that for sidewalks and pathways in the near future, which I think will be a huge benefit to everybody to understand our condition of those facilities as well as just our roads that vehicles are driving on. All right, next slide just covers some of the annual programs that we're also funding through the CIP process, the capital improvement program process. We're covering safe routes to school, traffic calming. Both of those programs go through the traffic department. And then we have constantly trying to catch up on our ADA compliance, which we are very in non-compliant, but we are working on it every year. And thank you for funding the bond so that we can do that. We also have programs that go to watershed management, and also Alaska Railroad. We have a required agreement that we help maintain their facilities on their tracks across our facilities. So those are some of the annual programs. And then next slide, Taylor, thank you so much for running the slides. This is our CIP timeline, and I'm going to show it two different ways. So this will be one slide. The next slide will say basically the same thing, but in a different format, lots of different learners, and just different ways to say the same thing. But basically, I really want to flag, many of you are probably familiar with the CIP process and how it works. And I really want to flag that this year, something that's been a request, I believe, of community councils and also of the assembly is that we better adjust our timeline for community councils and provide enough time to submit the surveys. And so we were previously, you know, doing the CIP survey sort of in the March to June timeline. I don't think it was ever exactly over those 4 months, but somewhere in there, it's generally been that way for the last few years, at least as long as I've been involved in it. This year, we're going to try to move it forward and launch it in January, such that you can see, you just have, I guess, you may or may not have more time with it, but hopefully it better aligns. I know for me, I get at Airport Heights Community Council, I get requests from our legislators about our capital projects to send to the legislature for those requests. And it would be great for us to see those lists at that time so that we can figure out, you know, this project isn't moving in the municipality program, so I want to send this to the legislature or something like that. So I think it's going to help all of us, and I'm excited about it. So basically that's going to force me in my professional life to make sure that the project list is ready to go next month so that we can have the survey ready. Then once the survey is closed, we will, as departments, will go through and evaluate and rank them with that input, as well as our other metrics that we rank them, and I will cover that in a minute. Then we work with, we pull together our whole program based on how those projects get ranked. We give that information to OMB. OMB and the administration sort of finesse that list to come up with what they presented to the assembly. We presented to planning and zoning, which we were a little bit late and did that on Monday this week. It should be in October, but we have a new administration this year, so no worries. Got through planning and zoning. It was approved by the assembly last night. And then again, in the new year, we'll reach back out to our legislators from a municipality perspective and work on those CAPSIS requests just as community councils do. So if you go to the next slide. Oh,
And it's good to see
sorry,
you.
Taylor, can you go back?
Thanks for coming. Good to see you again.
Yes, likewise.
So just, and I realized that it was kind of forward looking, like trying to give us the year there, right?
Yep.
But you see the one block, dark blue there in November. And I think you were just speaking about a little bit. So let's just pretend you just took that one block and I was gonna get up tomorrow and go look to find out what happened? What happened in November there then, since we're in November? Where would I find that list? How do we find out about it? And what indeed actually did happen last night?
So I'm guessing it's not yet, the approved list is not yet on the OMB website, but the OMB website is the best place to go. And I would be happy to share that link with you. I think it might just be muni.org/budget, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I think it's the, budget and then
you would go to the capital improvement program.
you
There
go to the movie.
There will eventually be, right now it's just the proposed capital improvement program would be the link that you'd click on. There will eventually be also the approved capital improvement program that they'll add in there.
And part of the reason I'm asking is because November, I mean, when you look at that, you think, okay, we're coming to the end of the year or something. But this process, November is really not the end of anything. It's just the end of that section to lead in to what's gonna happen up there in the blue and January through however long the legislators in session, right?
So a lot of folks in community councils, they come to a meeting, they don't always attend a lot, and they say, this is the thing I'm really passionate about, put a speed bump on my street. Or, fix this intersection, it's really bad. And they see their state legislator and they're going down in June and they're like, here, take this with you. And that's kind of a short circuit, because it looks like the way the process is supposed to work is councils pass resolutions, whatever, they fill out the CIP survey, which then gets vetted and goes through the process, the assembly, and then it becomes part of the city's request that goes in CAPSIS. So it sounds like in order for it to be like a community vetted project that the legislature might fund, it probably takes about a year. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yep, so thank you, Daniel. The question that I got that I had on the top of my notes was the question we also get is, why isn't my project in next year's bond package? Well, it sort of takes a little while for a project to get legs, right? You have to introduce it, you have to get that community feedback. Projects are more successful if they have more community support. So as much as we do honor when we hear from individual residents about issues, we absolutely honor those questions and concerns. But if it comes in from a resident and then also has the support of the community council, that project is more likely to move forward. And that does take time, and it also takes the whole cycle to sort of get involved.
So the what
Sorry, can we take a question from Chris? Chris asked a question online. Go ahead. Chris,
Are
can
you?
thank you. Yeah, we can
Thank
hear
you. Okay, thank you. I appreciate your help for my hearing issues. I am really confused because Meg Zalatil told me yesterday that January is when we start going out to the public and we ask the public what they want. And we create a list in our community council that goes with whatever the government gives us. And I don't see that anywhere in this process. So my community council has had problems with this every single year. We have to beg and look and spend hours trying to find out where our list is because it's not given to us. And then when it's time to submit the list, the people who are trying to submit it are not allowed electronically to do it. And I know this year I ended up doing it and it still was not received. So there's some bumps in the road, and I really want to know about when CCs are supposed to go out to the public and ask them for what they want. And a prime example would be the Cuddy Chalet that we mentioned earlier. That has been worked on for 40 some years. We would like to see it on the list. How is it going to get on that list? What I'm seeing is there's a whole lot of public employees putting together lists and this and that, and the public is not working with the new items. I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
So Chris, thank you for that concern. I agree. This process has not always been smooth. Like I said, I have the community council perspective as well, and absolutely agree with you that it hasn't always been easy to understand how it all works. And I think that's why we're here tonight, to sort of give some of the background and some of the sort of foundational knowledge, and then we will come back, or at least I will come back. I'm not sure Taylor's capacity. I know that she's much busier than I am, but I will come back and be available not only to give a training once the survey goes live, but also provide sort of that technical assistance to help individual councils submit their surveys. And I would say, Chris, when you're interested in going out to the public for feedback, it would be great to do that once that survey is available, because then you'll have that list of projects that are proposed either previously from your council or from the municipality. And you could share that with folks and either decide, you know, these are the projects we want to keep or not, or projects we want to add. So that's going to be that January to April timeframe this coming year.
Well, it needs to be put on your chart, because we're going out to the public in January, and we're going to ask them, what would you like on the CIP? We don't know what the public wants. And they should have the opportunity to come to the community council and tell us what they want. And then we should be able to send that to the city at some point, and then you work it in that list that we're going to rank.
Fair enough. I totally understand your point. This is the public works timeline, so that's why it doesn't have the community council public involvement. But I appreciate you doing that work.
I just have one comment for Hillside Community Council. We basically send out a survey sometime in February for all the CIP stuff, and that survey is communicated to the council area. Then we take that information and incorporate it based upon what we have on our to-do list, and pretty consistently we get some trends that make a lot of sense. There's issues with safety and pedestrian safety, child safety, that kind of stuff. So I would suggest that maybe just add a line onto that one, just says community council, and just add a placeholder for community survey stuff.
There was no place to add anything when we actually did the survey. You did the survey, let's pretend you had 10 items, you ranked 10 items, that was it, period. We could not put comments in, we could not put anything in. We made many, many phone calls trying to find out, how do we add to this? How do we ask questions about this? And nobody knew. So how is Hillside managing that? It would be helpful to know.
So I think he was speaking that they put out their own survey as a community council. That's what Airport Heights does as well, although we have way too many projects on our list, so it's kind of a bear. But yeah, there are lots of ways to solicit feedback. Absolutely.
Rogers Park says that they do the same.
Great.
Joe, did you have a question?
Yes, so the current projects that you're working on today, when were those approved?
Current projects like that got constructed this summer, for example.
Or what you're working on today? When did that formally get approved that the public could view and go, oh, this is what they're currently working on this year?
Over the last 20 years, probably. Video projects going back more than 20 years.
That's what's so confusing to the average person to understand this.
And one of the things we want to do in the new year is do like a public outreach about CIPs, so that kind of a education about it that's aimed at people who maybe aren't involved in councils and explain the process is something you and I had talked about as well.
I just have.
There are several more questions.
Well, yeah, so you've got from January to April, the process for community council surveys. So what is the new deadline? Usually it's June 15th, you know, it comes out in February, March. And so now what are you looking at with this new timeline, the submittal deadline for 2025?
So I'm not gonna make any promises on the date that we're gonna get the survey live. Again, new administration, so everybody's working furiously to make all the changes that are being requested. And I know that this will have a big impact on community councils. I know it will have a big impact on my community council. So I really want to make this happen, but it is contingent on IT because
Okay.
IT develops the
To be
survey.
announced.
Yep.
Okay.
But I think we understand also that, you know, community councils have a process. And so ideally it would be open for 4 months regardless of when it's launched.
Okay.
You know, if it's January 1, it might end April 30th. If it's January 30th, it might end.
Okay, okay, and then a quick follow-up. For years and years and years and years, there always ends up projects that are nowhere near turning in that are on our CIP list. So then I'm typically the one that does that. I have to go in there and type in, please remove this project. This is not within our area. The next year, it's there again. Please remove this project. I've done it over and over and over again throughout the years, literally. How can that improve?
So that's one of the things that I'm hoping to work with IT on. What we'd like to do is, if many of you have been involved in community councils for a long time, there used to be different categories in the survey. There was a PM&E category and a DOT category and a Parks and Rec category. And I think we'd like to bring that back. And what we might do is just put an area-wide category. And, you know, I don't know what projects are gonna end up on there, but it's something like the Campbell Creek Trail crossing of Lake Otis. You know,
Yes.
that is a project that affects the entire community because it connects all the trails together.
But you could say that about so many projects
Sure.
all around town. It's
Sure.
just, it's kind
But
of a
it's an
burden.
example of a project, and if you don't wanna rank area-wide projects, you don't have to, but that would hopefully be its own category. Rather than mixing it in with all of the projects that are in your community back across the
I will let you continue the presentation, but I did see 2 quick questions here that are just
Briefly answer, because, yeah, Kathy, as a former council president, I used to also have to go in and say, you know, highway to highway is still not our priority. Because it's an area-wide priority of the municipality. And so having that area-wide section makes a lot of sense, but to remove those items out of the system so they don't appear there gives the false impression that they're not still in the CIP. So they need to show up on the list somewhere, even if they're not your council's priority. You can rank them at the bottom if you want, but the municipality, the assembly, the administration have said these are still, or AMATs or DOT have said these are area-wide priorities, or, you know, Kabata, whatever it was, it might be controversial, was a large priority of maybe not just one community council. There was another question about, you know, where do we see these lists? Like, how does the full CIP come together? And I wish I'd brought the binder that,
This is just the PM&E project.
that's just the PMD portion. That's
2 pages printed.
this binder they presented on Monday in planning and zoning about yay thick, double-sided. And that's where it really comes together from the municipality side of things that the assembly approved. And then there's, of course, the consolidated legislative request from municipality to the state legislature. And that's where, you know, if you've ever worked in CAPSIS as a community council president before, you get to input your projects that way. And it has a little yes or no box. Is this community supported? Yes or no? And when you have the municipality of Anchorage coming in with their consolidated request to the legislature, that's, you know, the legislators, when they go in there and they actually submit their requests to the finance committee, they can say, yes, it is community supported. But there's really 2 times when the whole thing is put together, like when all the sausage is basically like in one spot, right? And that's when this municipality and the planning and zoning and the assembly approve it, and then if there's a consolidated request to the legislature, it gets.
I just have one comment, sir. John, it's Ricard here. So, just in regard to what's going on now, the municipality gets those bonds approved by the voters, but they don't necessarily execute on those particular contracts, depending on the conditions and the things that occur over time. So you can have a bond that was approved 5 years ago, it might just be started next year. Because there's no sunset clause in any of these, unfortunately. So that's kind of one of those things, at least in my research, I found out is that if you really want to keep track of all that, you've got to really pay attention to it, because you could have a culvert replacement, across the C Street or something that was part of a bond that was placed 4 years ago. And they were just going through and doing portions of that. So that's one of the realities. So it's hard to answer that question. What gets funded next? The other comment I wanted to make is that I spoke to I spoke to Anna Raleigh. She's the District 3 Assembly person, and she kind of explained the timeline on this. So once it gets approved, like for example, stuff's been approved this year, it's not until it has to go through, it'll be introduced in late December, according to her, and in early January, the need will be finalized by Tuesday, 1/21/25, and then it gets included on the 4/1/25 ballot. So that's the process. When you see all those projects that have been approved now that are approved for bonding, then they have to go through that process, and then show up on the voter's ballot. And then, depending on the need, urgency, and resources available, then those things get executed either in the following year or following years, depending on that kind of stuff. So
Thank you.
anyway, I just want to clarify that because it's really
Very helpful.
important on this timeline that, you understand where it's going to happen at. So
We'll let you continue. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the next slide is really just the same process, just shown in a different visual way. I don't think we necessarily need to talk through it because I think we have, but this is why, when you're submitting your survey, that's informing the next year's budget process. A little bit challenging to think about, but that's just how the cycle works. So the next slide covers sort of the public works project evaluation process. And we bring together multiple different departments, representatives, and go through all of these criteria for the projects that we're ranking, because it is a very extensive process. We are not ranking every project every year. So we're not, if a project got scored in the last couple of years, we're not going to go back and rescore it every single year. But these are the criteria that we are looking at when we're going through that process as a committee. And then I'll pass it over to Taylor.
Thanks, Chelsea. Parks and Recreation in the past did not have any type of scoring. It was a combination of using institution knowledge, I'm told, and basically looking at a combination of the things that we've now formalized in this scoring matrix. So for us, when we're putting something on our CIP, we're looking at a bunch of things. One, is it plan supported? Has there been public advocacy? And this looks like a challenge grant with Anchorage Park Foundation. It also looks like a letter of support from a community council or a user group. Is it a CIP survey request? And if so, how high up has it been ranked? Is it user group supported? So in this case, I'll use pickleball as an example. It's just it's a growing recreational activity in our community that we have not a lot of resources to accommodate those user groups. So that's like one example of, okay, we want to change a tennis court that has not many rentals and we want to move it into a pickleball or a mixed use court, like what user group is supporting that resource. The other one is encourages health, safety, welfare. So really we're looking at playgrounds, like are they really old, or parking lots? Do we not have accessible parking spots that we can facilitate inclusive access? The environmental impact. This one is near and dear to my heart because I think we build a lot of things that in the wrong spot, maybe. So that makes it more expensive than maybe it needs to be or should be. Outside match. So examples of this would include private funds raised through the Anchorage Park Foundation, or even utilizing DOT and federal funds for outside match through the AMATS process? Does it support community resources? So we're looking at prioritizing those large community parks over maybe small pocket parks and neighborhood parks. Does it support communities of need? And this could mean a user group, like I used that pickleball example, or a specific population, like are there a lot of kids nearby? And then property ownership. There's a mix of things with park land. We own the land, we lease the land, we have partnerships and things. And so for us, we want to make sure we're prioritizing investing bond dollars in the facilities that we own. That's not to say that legislative money or private funds can't be leveraged for those other projects, but when something is going from very start, like which really is the CIP survey and the things that the community brings to us, all the way to what ends up on the CIP, these are the factors that we're trying to rank and push out in a way that helps educate folks and gets to a place where we're making smart investments that are like Chelsea said, they're really supported by the community first and foremost, and then they're just smart to spend public dollars on. So thank you.
Yes,
Cliff
so-
has a question online.
Thank you. I'm wondering if actually it's the same question I'm about to ask. Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, just a quick question on the Chugiak Eagle River Parks and Rec Board. Since it's separate from the municipality, is there a different CIP process for them and how they rank, or is it fall in line with you guys? Do you work with them?
Cliff, that's a great question. So, that's an important distinguishing thing. So, my position, I oversee Anchorage specific, so it's the Anchorage Bowl, and then my boss, the director of Parks and Recreation, oversees the municipality. So it's sort of split. So, Director Mike Braniff, then I oversee the Anchorage side of things, and then in Eagle River, there's a whole different group out there that does stuff. I shared the matrix and the scoring with Kelly when she was in that position, and she was really excited to bring this to the board. And I know Mike is planning on bringing it to the board once it gets to a place where I've basically worked through all the kinks. So Cliff, I hope that answers your question. But it's something that we're working through, and I believe will be coming out to Eagle River Chugiak in the next year.
Okay, that would be great. We just had our meeting last Thursday and it wasn't mentioned then. So thank you very much for the information.
Sure, and I'll follow up with Mike that we chatted.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask a similar question. I'm on the southern community side, not the northern community side, and I've always viewed the CIP process as a way that the Anchorage Bowl can prioritize all of its projects. And we're kind of either ignored or we have a separate process. And I've never understood whether they're supposed to be integrated or not. And it sounds like there is supposed to be some level of integration. I'm just not sure there ever has been and how it works. So the question is broader, but it's really the northern and southern communities having
Yeah, so
similar questions.
So as Taylor mentioned for Parks and Rec, I think that's sort of what that department is the direction they're going. From Public Works, I can say that I work directly with Tony Windsor for the Bursa and then with Kyle Kelly from Birdwood to move forward the priorities that are coming from those service areas. So we really let them decide, and then we try to elevate them through the process.
And then the last thing is, sorry.
No, you're good.
The related thing is there a difference between the way things are prioritized if the funding comes from, bond or state or external or taxpayer funded internal?
Do you mean in terms of like projects moving forward?
In terms of how they're prioritized and how they sit. So when you have projects which are funded from, the capital component of the levies in Subversa or in Girdwood, are they scored differently or are they still scored against everything in the bowl, which comes from a different funding source?
So we don't, when we go through our project scoring process, we are almost entirely scoring ARDSA projects. And like I said, I will take projects that come from Tony from Subversa, and then I will take projects that come from Kyle from Bursa. Yeah.
There you go.
How can the public understand whether something is a capital project or just routine maintenance?
That is a great question that I am still trying to figure out. So, it is a project by project question. And I think,
So in my neighborhood, we have a deteriorated stairs. And at first it was said, well, it's just routine maintenance, we'll fix it. Then they go, no, it's not routine maintenance, it's a capital project. No, it's gonna be, it's just very confusing to know, how we maintain what we have, I guess.
yeah, and right now, given the way our funding structure is set up, we partially fund our maintenance department because they help us with capital projects. So there is some, there's just some challenging dynamics that we work with. And I would say that projects do evolve. You know, you go in there to do maintenance and then all of a sudden you realize it's not just this one sinkhole that's like, we just need a patch. We actually need to redo the whole entire storm drain system. So that is, you know, part of it is that projects do just evolve when you're at the project, when you open up the ground or when you look at the CCTV. And so, you know, part of that's not an easy answer, not a great answer, but it's just the way things move. And I would say maybe the same thing with the stairwell. You know, maybe they got in there to try to do some maintenance, realized actually we need to replace this whole thing. So.
Yeah, and with the stairwell, I'll also add that land ownership is taking it's playing into this, where we may not be able to use road bond funding because it's in DOT right of way. There's all these little nuances, and with that, I think the language was it's a maintenance project because there was an initial look at the structure and we thought, okay, there's a few fixes that need to happen. And then we got a structural report. Parks helped with that. And it basically said, this is not an acceptable condition for public use. So it needs to be replaced. At which point, like Chelsea said, it's really similar to that sinkhole is actually a much bigger problem. It needs to be ripped out and put back in. So it's more of like a gradient or marching up a mountain in the case of the stairs and many of the projects that end up on the capital improvement list.
We have two questions, one from Daniel.
Hey, Taylor, Daniel George, Mountain View. I have two questions for you. One, as a Mountain View member, we have a master plan for Davis Park. And we were in the most recent bond round for park improvements. And this goes back to like property ownership. It turns, you know, Davis Park is not actually owned by the municipality, it's leased. And so there were questions about whether we can bond for and spend taxpayer money on military land. You know, other parks we have like Louis Mizell, it's nothing but a right of way for a road. And so this kind of goes down to like a fundamental question. Is there a list of the parks in Anchorage that are dedicated versus not dedicated? I've had several people ask me over the years, and every time I ask the question, I hear, we'll have a list next year. And I've been asking it for like 10 years. How do I find out what parks are dedicated and what aren't?
So if you like spreadsheets, have I got a spreadsheet for you?
Sounds like an answer. I'm excited.
Yeah. So essentially, the person who basically was the keeper of the keys for a lot of the park dedication information worked for our department for like 20 years, and he retired a week after I took my position. I hope it wasn't the same. I don't think it was because of me. Like I had a Jerry Seinfeld moment, but anyway, so his name was Tom Carosi, and he was really into paper. So I've been trying, along with my staff, to dive into a lot of the things that he was doing and move it into a digital format that's a little bit easier to digest and disseminate. So with that, I will say that there's a slight nuance in that parks are not dedicated. The parcels within parks are dedicated. So there's a lot of like legal jargon in the assembly resolutions or ordinances that dedicate a park, which is actually dedicating parcels within a park. So you'll have parks that are fully dedicated. All the parcels are dedicated. You'll have some that are partially dedicated. Some of the parcels are dedicated. And then of course, some that are just nothing's been touched. So I have this spreadsheet that has some citations for AOs, some legal descriptions, the park, and then the parcels that is mostly up to date that I would be happy to share. As long as it's under the understanding that it's a work in progress, but it's something to move on. So I'm happy to provide that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
I saw a question earlier from Darren. I'm not sure if you put your hand
I'll,
down.
I'll withhold my question for now.
Mike, I've got an update for, not an update, but something that jumps on.
Yeah, actually, how many more slides do you have? Because we're down to about 12 minutes.
We're basically done.
Okay.
We have one more that just shares, if you want to see all of the PM&E projects, which are, public works projects, you can go to community.org/PME projects. This, like the CIP process, which I am only 6 months into my role and hope to, massage and make it more user-friendly to community councils as well as internally. This tool, this dashboard is a great resource, but it is absolutely a work in progress. And I would be happy to walk anybody through it if you get there and you're like, this website just isn't working for me. And or if you want to just share feedback with me as I work to make it a little bit more usable. Right now, it's a tool that's trying to work both internally and externally, and I don't think it's doing a good job of either, but it is a place to go to look up all the PM&E projects. And then just our last slide, and Taylor, I think in the notes of the PowerPoint, we put our contact information. If you just wanted to copy and paste that into the chat, that would be awesome.
And I will throw it in the recap email.
Great, and that's all I got.
Thank you. Kathy, do you have a comment?
Well, first of all, is this available, is PowerPoint presentation going to be available for us
It
to?
is on our website already, and I will make sure all that link goes out in the recap as well.
Okay, great. And then, that follow-up question about designated versus dedicated. Well, that's Tom Perosi. I worked with him probably 10 years ago on trying to figure out which parks would then turn in community council boundaries. For designated versus, and he actually came up with a list that now I'm not sure if it's still current, but shockingly, there was 10 plus parks that were just designated and not dedicated, including Fish Creek Estuary, which was just shocking, but that doesn't have a higher level of protected status. And I think every council, if they started digging into it, would have that same wow moment that we had no idea that this was the case. Is there any way that a project on a and then to try and tackle all of that by staff or some contractor working with staff, try and figure that out would be a massive effort. I'm sure Taylor would agree. So could something on our CIP wish list be funding for that effort? Or would that be better trying to address some other way to try and do that on a scale, not just community council neighborhood by neighborhood, but throughout the bowl area, starting out with the bowl area? I mean, because we really should know and really have protected dedicated status where we take a vote of the people to undedicate it for any kind of non-municipal use. I mean, that's pretty critical on some of the areas where, specifically Turnagain and airport, and whether they want to eat up a chunk of HLB land or, land that's owned by the community that isn't a dedicated park, etc. So, and I'm sure every council could come up with a scenario where a private developer, all it takes is a vote of the people if they want to snatch some parkland that's not dedicated for private use. So it has some tremendous ramifications, but that's going to take an effort that requires money. So is that a legitimate CIP project, perhaps?
It wouldn't be something we could bond for because
Okay.
it's not a capital project.
Okay,
But it could be a budget request.
so maybe that's something FCC could kind of work on in terms of resolution, councils could consider and submit it to staff and or assembly and something in the near future, if we felt like that was a priority for us collectively.
I appreciate you acknowledging that it's a huge lift, Kathy, because it really is. And if I could just wave a wand and have it be done, I would love to be able to have a public resource where folks could just click on a parcel and the AO with all the information would pop up and it would clearly delineate whether a park was dedicated. We also have like a zoning thing that we're trying to work on where many of our parks we inherited, they were donated or whatever, and they're not zoned correctly. Some of them are still zoned as residential parcels or whatever. So that's also sort of bundled into this overall housekeeping effort. But yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging that and advocating for more resources to facilitate something a little bit more useful.
Thank you, Taylor.
Are any more questions?
Yeah. First comment, thank you very much for taking the time to work on the website because it is challenging at best. My question is pretty straightforward. So there are roads within the municipality that are obviously state-owned. But there's also roads that are state-owned that are under the auspice of the municipality and never quite understood how that all works. So you could probably refresh us on that. But basically, what is the responsibility or the CIP process when the state owns that property, but the municipality is responsible for maintaining it?
So there used to be more roads that were owned by the state and maintained by the municipality. There are not as many anymore. There was a formal memorandum of agreement that, you know, the state would actually pay the municipality to maintain, or does pay the municipality to maintain the roads that are still under that sort of dynamic. And I guess I would say that for the most part, DOT maintains their own roads, so there are very few roads that would fall under this, but I think the DOT question with the CIP process, as we brought up sort of in the beginning, is I think it needs to be its own category, basically. Communities like Hillside, you know, primarily projects are on DOT roads, and so it's hard, you know, we as a municipality can't do a lot of bonding for those roads. We could do an area-wide bond if the road isn't maintained by a LRSA or DOT. But even then, you know, the dynamics get very tricky. The lawyers don't like us doing things that aren't allowed under like according to bond counsel. So I think having categories will help, but also talking to your legislators and working with DOT is critical.
Understood. So just kind of a follow-up on that then. So the process for a major thoroughfare, like for example, O'Malley, right, state-owned, maintained at some point, sometimes it's maintained by the municipality. For a majority of that time, it's poorly maintained by the state because they just don't have resources. And of course, last year when we had the snow crisis, you know, the mayor's office made a deal, and of course, he got a lot of flack for that, to have those roads maintained by the municipality because the state just wasn't doing it. And they were getting to the point, I don't know if you guys remember this, but Hillside Drive, the Armin Road was almost impassable for 3 days because the state didn't have the resources. And that's when the mayor issued the emergency proclamation. I guess my question is that agreement, is it ongoing, or was it just a one-time event? Is that how
that particular event was just a one-time event? There's not an ongoing agreement. There are formal memorandums of agreement between the state and the municipality for maintenance, and then there are some handshakes. We'll do this section of road if you do a better job over here, or vice versa. And so yeah, I guess that particular instance was just a one-time.
Thanks. That's all I have. Appreciate you both for
Yeah.
going through this process. It's like very challenging.
I understand, like I said.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thank you very much. I'm going to just ask one quick question, take for a minute. How would, there's been a discussion over the last many years about possibly a drainage utility. And would that make your life simpler, harder? Would that make our lives simpler or harder? You've got about 1 minute.
We have a lot of needs for storm drain. improvements in the municipality. Our storm drain system is failing, similar to our water and wastewater system, similar to our roads are just what we see on the surface.
Right.
So, I don't think I'm supposed to comment on a policy
Understood,
issue,
but
but.
I guess the question, the analogy there is water and wastewater is not dealt with by the CIP process, is it? It's dealt with separately.
Enterprises have their own CIP.
Yeah, so there is a separate process.
But
which
it-
is not,
But they have their budget book just like we do.
right.
Yeah.
But community councils typically, I don't think, do get too involved, are not that involved in that process when it's a utility.
Right.
Right, okay.
On that bombshell.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Taylor.
Good job staying in.